The general store in Red Hollow smelled of tobacco, old leather, spilled whiskey, and the faint copper tang of blood that never quite washed out of the floorboards. For 3 years, that scent had been Mara Kincaid's entire world. She was 23 now, though the mirror behind the counter showed a face that looked closer to 35. The braid she kept tight against her scalp was the same chestnut it had always been, but the shine was long gone. Her left eye still carried the faint violet shadow from last Tuesday's lesson. The right one had learned not to meet anyone's gaze too long. Calvin Pritchard owned the store, the saloon across the street, half the cattle that grazed the valley, and, for all practical purposes, Mara herself. He had taken her in after her father drank himself into a pine box and her mother followed 6 weeks later from a broken heart and pneumonia. At 19 Mara had been grateful. At 20 she had been frightened. At 21 she had understood there would be no leaving. The beatings came in 3 varieties. The first was for business, when a tin of peaches was short a penny, when a customer complained about short measure, when Mara spoke too softly and a sale was lost. Those bruises bloomed on arms and ribs, places clothing could cover. The second was for pleasure, late nights when the bottle was deep and Calvin remembered she was pretty beneath the fear. Those marks lived on thighs and breasts and the small of her back. The third, and rarest, was for defiance. One word too many. One look held too long. One night she tried the back door after closing. That time he had broken 2 ribs and blackened both eyes. Then he dragged her upstairs by the hair and locked the bedroom door for 3 days, feeding her nothing but water and his own bitter apologies until she whispered, "I'm sorry," so many times the words lost meaning. After that, Mara stopped trying doors. She learned to fold herself small. To speak in murmurs. To keep her hands busy so they wouldn't tremble. To smile at customers with the lower half of her face while the upper half stayed blank as river stone. Most folks in Red Hollow pretended not to notice. Some pretended so hard they convinced themselves it wasn't happening. A few, like old widow Crane and the half-breed blacksmith Tomas, slipped her extra coins or a heel of bread when Calvin wasn't looking. But no one spoke of it aloud. Calvin Pritchard's temper was as well known as his money, and no one wanted to be next. Until the afternoon the stranger walked in. It was late October, the kind of day when the wind carried winter on its teeth. The bell above the door gave a single, startled chime. Mara was stacking tins of sardines when she felt the temperature change. Not colder, exactly, but sharper, as though someone had drawn a blade across the air. She looked up. He was tall without seeming to try. Dust-colored duster coat, hat pulled low, the brim shading everything but a jaw carved from hickory and a mouth that looked like it had forgotten how to smile years ago. 2 guns rode his hips, tied down in the old way. The left one had a notch filed into the grip. He didn't speak at first. Just stood inside the doorway letting his eyes walk the length of the store, slow and deliberate. Calvin was behind the counter counting silver dollars, lips moving silently. He glanced up, saw the stranger, and his mouth tightened the way it did when he smelled trouble he couldn't immediately crush. "Afternoon," Calvin said. Not friendly. Not unfriendly. The tone of a man measuring how much force would be required. The stranger touched 2 fingers to his hat brim. "Afternoon." Mara kept stacking tins. Her hands shook now, just a little. She didn't know why. "You passing through?" Calvin asked. "Been passing through for a while." The stranger's voice was low, gravel under boots. "Thought I might rest the horse a day. Maybe 2. We got a livery. Saloon serves a decent steak. Rooms upstairs if you don't mind bedbugs." "I'll manage." The stranger stepped forward. His spurs rang once, softly. Mara risked a glance. His eyes were gray like winter sky after the snow has fallen and the world is waiting to see what happens next. They met hers for half a heartbeat. She dropped a tin. It hit the floor with a metallic clang and rolled under the counter. Calvin's head snapped around. God damn it, Mara. He stopped when the stranger moved. Not quickly. Not slowly. Just moved. He bent, picked up the tin, and set it gently on the shelf beside her trembling hand. Close enough that she smelled leather, horse, sagebrush, and something faintly like gun oil. Thank you, she whispered. He gave the smallest nod. Calvin cleared his throat. Loud. You need something specific, mister? Coffee beans. Arbuckle if you got it. Tobacco. And a box of .45 longs. Calvin measured the stranger again. Decided the man was just another drifter with coin. Mara. Fetch the order. She turned toward the back shelves. When she returned with the sack, the stranger was looking at the row of wanted posters tacked beside the tobacco case. One of them, a crude sketch of a man with a scarred cheek, had a red X through it. Still looking for that one? The stranger asked. Deputy says he's headed for Mexico, Calvin answered. Won't be our problem much longer. The stranger grunted. It might have been agreement. It might have been something else. He paid with a $20 gold piece. Didn't ask for change. As he turned to leave, his gaze touched Mara once more. This time he spoke directly to her, voice so low only she could hear. You all right? 3 words. 3 years of silence cracked open. She couldn't answer. Her throat had closed. She simply stared, eyes burning. He waited 2 seconds longer than necessary. Then he touched his hat again, pushed through the door, and was gone. Calvin watched him cross the street toward the livery. Damned drifters, he muttered. Always looking for something that ain't theirs. Mara said nothing. But something inside her chest, something that had been pressed flat and breathless for 3 years, gave a small, painful twitch. Like a bird trying to remember how wings worked. That night Calvin drank more than usual. He came upstairs earlier than normal, boots loud on the stairs. When he pushed the bedroom door open, Mara was already sitting on the edge of the mattress, hands folded, eyes down. He stood in the doorway a long moment, swaying. You looked at him, he said. She didn't answer. You looked at him like you wanted something. Still nothing. Calvin stepped inside. Closed the door. The lock clicked. I'm gonna remind you who you belong to, girl. He was slower than usual because of the whiskey. That was the only reason she lasted as long as she did. When he finally passed out across the foot of the bed, snoring wetly, Mara lay curled against the wall, tasting blood, counting breaths until the pain dulled enough to move. She waited until the grandfather clock downstairs struck 3. Then she slid off the mattress, bare feet silent on the cold boards. She took nothing. Not a shawl. Not her mother's silver locket hidden under the floorboard. Not even shoes. She simply walked down the stairs, through the dark store, and out the back door she hadn't touched in 2 years. The wind cut through her thin dress like knives. She didn't care. She walked. Past the livery. Past the church. Past the edge of town where the sagebrush began. She kept walking until her feet bled and the moon was low and silver. When she couldn't walk anymore, she sat on a rock beside the dry wash and waited to die. That was where the stranger found her at dawn. He didn't speak at first. Just dismounted, squatted on his heels a respectful distance away, and studied her the way he'd studied the store the day before. After a while he said, "You're a long way from a dress and a counter." Mara laughed. It came out broken. "I don't know where I'm going." "You running?" "I think so." "From him?" She nodded once. He looked east, toward the rising sun. "He'll come looking." "I know." He'll bring friends. I know that too. The stranger took off his duster and draped it over her shoulders without asking. It was warm from his body and smelled like freedom. I'm not a rescuing man, he said quietly. Never claimed to be. I didn't ask to be rescued. He nodded, as though that was the correct answer. I'm headed south. Toward the border. Got business in Juarez that don't like waiting. She looked up at him then. Really looked. You're not afraid of him. I've met worse. He'll kill you. Maybe. Why help me? The stranger took his time answering. 3 years ago, he said, I rode into a town called Bitter Creek. Saw a girl there. Same eyes you got now. Same way of holding herself like she was waiting for the next blow. I rode out the next morning. Didn't say a word. Didn't do a thing. He looked at the horizon. She's dead now. Hung herself with a bedsheet 2 months later. Mara felt something hot slide down her cheek. She didn't wipe it away. I swore I'd never ride past another pair of eyes like that again, he finished. So here I am. She swallowed. What's your name? People call me Cole. Just Cole? Just Cole's enough. She stood on shaking legs. The duster hung almost to her ankles. I'm Mara. He touched his hat brim. Mara. She took one step toward his horse. Then another. Cole didn't offer a hand up. He simply waited. When she reached the stirrup, he made a stirrup with his hands anyway. She stepped into them. He lifted her onto the saddle like she weighed nothing. Then he swung up behind her, arms loose around her waist so she wouldn't feel caged. They rode south. Behind them the town of Red Hollow woke slow and lazy. Calvin Pritchard woke with a headache and an empty bed. By noon he had 6 men riding with him, rifles across their saddles. They tracked the hoofprints easily enough. The trail led toward Apache Canyon. Calvin smiled when he saw the narrow mouth of the pass. Got bottled, he said. Ain't no way out but through us. He was wrong. Cole had known the canyon since he was 17, when he'd ridden with a cattle outfit that used it to hide stolen herds. He knew the side trail that climbed the north wall, narrow as a goat path, hidden by scrub pine. They reached it an hour ahead of the posse. Cole dismounted, pulled a stick of dynamite from his saddlebag, and fixed a short fuse. You ever shot a pistol? He asked Mara. She shook her head. He drew the left-hand Colt, checked the loads, and pressed it into her palm. Point it like you mean it. Pull the trigger like you're mad at it. Don't close your eyes. She nodded. He lit the fuse. The explosion wasn't loud, just a sharp crack and a roar of falling rock. The trail behind them collapsed into a smoking choke point. That'll slow Cole said. Won't stop forever. They rode on. 2 days later, in a meadow beside a thin creek, Mara woke to find Cole cleaning his guns by firelight. She watched him for a long time. Why Juarez? She asked. Man, there owes me money. A lot of it. For what? Keeping my mouth shut about something he did in '78. She smiled faintly. You're not a good man, are you? Cole considered it. I'm not a bad one either. I'm just particular about who I let hurt people. Mara looked into the fire. I want to learn to shoot, she said. He nodded. Tomorrow. The next morning he taught her. She was terrible at first. Hands shook. Bullets went wide. But she didn't quit. By the 4th day she could put 3 shots in a hand-sized circle at 15 paces. Cole watched her reload with steady hands and said, You're gonna be all right, Mara Kincaid. She looked at him then, really looked, and realized she believed him. On the 8th day they reached the Rio Grande. Across the brown water lay Mexico, and Juarez, and whatever came next. They stopped on the bank. Cole took off his hat, ran fingers through hair the color of dry grass. "I can take you across," he said. "Find you a place. A boarding house. Work. You'll be safe." "Or?" she asked. He met her eyes. "Or you can ride with me a while longer. I got more business south of Juarez. Bad men. Worse than Pritchard. But the pay's good. And nobody tells me who I can travel with." Mara looked at the river. Looked at the man who had walked through the door of her prison and refused to leave without her. Then she looked at her own hands, still bruised, still scarred, but no longer shaking. "I want to learn how to be dangerous," she said. Cole smiled. It was small. It was real. "Dangerous is a good thing to be," he said. He offered her the reins of the pack horse. She took them. Together they forded the river. Behind them the United States grew smaller. Ahead lay 1,000 miles of desert, mountains, and choices. And for the first time in 3 years, Mara Kincaid was making them herself. Somewhere north of the border, in the town of Red Hollow, Calvin Pritchard stood in the doorway of his empty store, staring at the road that led south. He never found her. Some said she died in the desert. Some said she crossed into Mexico and married a rancher. A few old-timers who remembered the stranger with the notched colt said something quieter. They said that every once in a while, when the wind is right, you can hear 2 horses moving south across the borderlands. One set of hoofbeats steady and calm. The other quick and sure, like someone who finally remembered she had wings.